My name is John Lineberger. I was born in Cass County, Texas, which is about 60 miles southeast of Texarkana, on August the 8th of 1937. Well, my parents were wonderful. I was very, very fortunate. My dad was a farmer at the time, and we lived on the farm until I was 10 years old. And at that time, my dad got a job working at the railroad in Texarkana. Fortunately, he did, and we moved to Texarkana, and I went to school there. I went through high school in Texarkana, Texas.
What was it like growing up there?
Well, it was wonderful, and I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. Not for a while. I was the oldest of the kids, so they came along in life and laughed along. But we were just poor people. Didn't know it at the time. We had plenty to eat from our gardens and our hogs and so forth, and so it was nice.
Tell me about how you ended up in Washington County and then how you eventually ended up in public service.
Well, after we moved to Texarkana, as I said, I went on through high school in Texarkana, Texas. I was fortunate enough then to play for the Texarkana Tiger football team, and as a result of that, I got a scholarship offer from, among other places, Arkansas, University of Arkansas. Now, at the time I was married, my wife did not want to go to Arkansas. The rivalry between Texarkana, Texas, and Texarkana, Arkansas was really something. But I made a visit up here. She went to a few other places with me to visit, and I made a visit alone, I guess, the first time I came up to Arkansas, and I loved it. I really loved the town of Fayetteville. I loved the coaches, the coaching staff. The players were all seemed to be genuine, and I wanted to come here, and finally convinced my wife to come here. So we entered school in the fall, I guess, of 1955, and I didn't graduate at the time. I went back to Texarkana. Had to do some work then. My wife's father had owned a tire business, and he unfortunately died. And I did some help then in that, and then was able to come back though to Fayetteville in 1965, finish up my business degree in the spring and summer of 1965, and then entered law school in fall of 1965. Graduated in January of 1968. As a matter of fact, our graduating class had a 50-year reunion last year. It just doesn't seem possible to have been 50 years ago. But yeah, we've had a good life. We had a wonderful life, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Talk about how you went from law school to eventually private and then public service.
When I graduated from law school, I went to work for the firm of Ball and Goldman, E.J. Ball and Jim Goldman, and I felt really fortunate. They were 2 outstanding trial lawyers. Mr. Ball was primarily a tax lawyer, and he worked not only in Fayetteville, but he worked across Arkansas and even in some other states. He had graduated from the University of Arkansas, and at the time he was the University of Arkansas's legal counsel right out of college, and so he was a very smart man. Anyway, they gave me a job, and I went to work there, and I really wanted more trial experience, and I tried a few cases in front of Judge Bompin Cummins, who was our circuit judge at the time, and he called me over to his office one day. He asked if I'd be interested in a full-time, or not a full-time, but a part-time job as representing poor people charged with criminal felonies, who didn't have a lawyer. Back in those years, the judge had to appoint a lawyer to represent somebody, and they served without pay when they did it. And the judge usually would appoint a lawyer that had happened to be in the courtroom at the time of the arraignment. And as a result, a lot of lawyers started skipping whenever the court, whenever the arraignments came up, and so he was having to make phone calls and try to chase somebody down. At any rate, he told me, says, I think I can get $500 from the county if you'll do this part-time then, and I'd like for you to get busy and see if you do it, I'd like for you to get busy and see if you can get one of these LEAA grants, Law Enforcement Assistance Administration grants, that were available then for about anything that had to do with law enforcement. So I did, and I was the only public defender for a while, and after we got the money for to fund the job properly, I continued then as part-time, but as a public defender, and I had an assistant that worked full-time, and for the first time I had a secretary working at that time, and so I did that then, I guess, for about 5 years, close to 5 years, before I went on the bench. Continued my practice of law, continued to work at the law school. I did a bunch of things to make some money then, to pay off those debts and things from law school, and to support my family.
What was it like back then in court? You mentioned Judge Cummings. I mean, what was it like trying cases back in the day?
Well,
Defending.
yeah, it was tough because we had a great prosecutor at the time, Malin Gibson, and Malin knew how to prosecute cases. If he had anything that was weak, he'd plead them out. He didn't go in court then and try cases he didn't think he could win. But I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed the experience I got from it. I enjoyed the combativeness then of what was going on, and it really gave me some good experience that I would not have gotten otherwise.
Talk about the judges who were the judges. What were they like? You mentioned Cummings, and then later.
Well, Washington County was very fortunate to have Judge Maupin Cummings as circuit judge and Judge Tom Butt as the chancellor. When I first got out of law school in 1968, those two judges covered 4 counties in northwest Arkansas. They were the only state judges doing it. Washington, Madison, Carroll, and Benton counties. And then both counties started to grow. And finally the legislature enacted a law then that created 2 judgeships to cover Benton, Carroll, and Madison County, and left then the 2 judges, Judge Cummings and Judge Butt, then to serve just Washington County. And the dockets were growing rapidly back at that time. This was in the 70s. And so the legislature then provided 2 more judges for Washington County, but they also tacked Madison County back to Washington County and left the 2 judges covering the 3 counties. They only covered Benton and Carroll County. And so the 2 new judgeships were created. One was to start instantly, and by appointment of the governor, and the other was not to start until the next general election. Then the one that started instantly was a new circuit judge, and the one to come on at the next election would be at the chancellor. And so our bar association at the time wanted to have a word in who the governor appointed. At that time, David Pryor was governor, and so they talked to the governor, and he agreed then that we could have just a little election among members of the bar. The lawyers up here would elect somebody then who they thought should serve that term, and then present that to the governor, and with the hopes that the governor then would follow and appoint it. And I was fortunate enough to get elected then by my peers, and sure enough, the governor appointed me. So I started on March 15th of 1975, and served out that term, which ended at the end of 1976. And I ran for election then for the chancery position, that other position that was created, and was fortunate enough to win a very, very tight and close race then. And so I started then as chancellor and served in that capacity until I retired at the end of 2000.
Talk to me about the prosecutors during that time. Who were the prosecutors, and what were they like in court?
Ken Smith, I think, was primarily, Malin was prosecutor to start with. Malin had continued then. He was prosecutor, I guess, when I went on the bench, or when I started as public defender. And he continued to serve in that capacity until he was elected judge then to replace Judge Maupin Cummings, and when Judge Cummings retired. And Kim, I believe, came on afterwards. And those prosecutors, I thought, were excellent people. And Kim Smith was just good as like Malin was wonderful. And they hired people, too, that were very competent, very capable, and did a good job then in handling cases. They knew which ones to try and which ones, to plead and so forth. And so we were very fortunate to have those people.
Who followed you in the public defender's office?
John Baker. John had been my deputy until I became judge, and then fortunately he was appointed then to serve as public defender. And John was another good choice, and really good choice. and he served many years and continued to serve as the public defender in Washington County. And then he had his deputies that came on with him at the time.
What are some of the cases that stand out? Oh, I mean, I know you had a lot of business in front of you on the bench. Cases did you do, and what are some that stand out?
Oh boy, this.
I mean, were you criminal or
well,
Chancery?
I started out as a circuit judge, and I was going to handle the civil docket on the circuit side, but Judge Cummins and I had agreed to split it up that way, and he'd handle the criminal cases. Well, at that time, we had a lot of older judges in the state that was getting close to retirement, and there were a lot of other districts that were falling behind. I mean, the judges just had more than they could do, and the legislature couldn't, just appoint a whole host of judges at the time. There wasn't enough money. And so when I went on the bench, we had a fellow by the name of Dick Huey, Judge Huey. He had been a circuit judge for many years, and he was head of what was called then the administrative department, I believe. And anyway, Judge Huey called me one day and he said, "John, I need you to go down, if you would, and try some cases in Polk County. We're way behind down there in criminal cases. And I sure would like for you to go down there and hear those." And he said, "If you go down there a week a month." And I thought, well, that's quite a bit, but we were lucky enough to get a new judge up here, and they didn't get one, so I felt sort of an obligation to help out. And so that 6-month term turned into 3 years. I went down to Polk County and tried criminal cases, and they were way behind. I went down, and the statute of limitations had run on some really serious cases that I had to dismiss when we first started in. But I got a lot of experience as a judge, because we'd set a whole batch of cases in starting Monday morning. And the lawyers had to be in there, and they didn't know which case we were going to call first. And so they'd start pleading a lot of the cases. But anyway, we'd work day and night, and I had a court reporter too at the time that fortunately was willing to put in the same hours, and work a day, and we went in sometimes 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, which I learned not to do that, as you tire out after a while. But that gave me a lot of experience, and I had a lot of pretty tough criminal cases that I heard during that time. But I remember, I'll have to tell you something kind of comical about that. Judge Huey would call me then, and he'd ask me then to, hear cases there, and he'd call me later, and he'd ask me about hearing a case someplace else where a judge had to recuse, or they had an overload, or for some reason, and he'd say, "John, will you go here?" Well, I'd never refused Judge Huey. Any place he wanted me to go, or any case he wanted me to hear, I went. But as I say, back at that time, we had a bunch of LEAA money, and they also would pay for judges to go to a school someplace and go to seminars at various places. And a lot of those older judges didn't want to go. They were getting ready to retire, and they weren't going. So there's a lot of money available. And I remember Judge Hugh would call me up and say, "John, how would you and Barbara like to go to San Francisco for a week?" "Oh, Judge, I'd love it." It'd be at a seminar, and he'd say, "All expenses paid." And of course, the state didn't pay for everything, but they had a list of expenses they would pay, and they paid a good part of them. And he'd do that, regularly. I went to a lot of places. I got to go to a lot of different nice places, seminar as a result of that. And so it worked both ways. And I'd work hard in it, but I got a chance to
go. Back to Washington County. When did you start doing criminal cases, if you did?
Well, I didn't do many. The only ones I did is when we exchanged the judges. Our judges at that time had what you call an exchange agreement, which means that one could sit for the other at any time, and if they chose, or if two agreed to do that. So I'd hear a few criminal cases in Washington County when Judge Cummins had to recuse, or was ill, or something like that. But most of the cases I heard in Washington County, and particularly after I became Chancellor, were domestic cases and cases that were tried without juries. It was me then to hear the case. Boundary land disputes, probate cases, divorces, those were the kind of cases. That's primarily what I was hearing in Washington County.
What are some of the cases that stand out, if any, that you remember, maybe different or interesting?
Well, one of the most, I guess, unusual cases I ever heard of. I was assigned to hear this criminal case in Baxter County, and I wound up having to move the case over to Yale County from there, change the venue. This young girl, who was, I guess, about 18 to 20 years old, was accused of stealing a baby, murdered a mama. And I went over to try the case, and she's a beautiful young lady, really nice looking. And she had told her family that she was pregnant. She was married to a felon, and told her family that she was pregnant, expecting a child. And she went through a period of time where her stomach enlarged, and her parents and others thought she really was. And doctors then came on, and I think they called it pseudocyesis or something like that. And but there came a time when she had to have the baby. I mean, you can only go so long telling folks then. And so she read in the local newspaper an article about one of her classmates that had recently had this child, and so she rushed out one morning in her pickup truck to her classmate's house and told her classmate that she was doing a cute kid contest for this paper, and that she'd like to enter her friend's baby picture then in this cute kid contest. And of course, it thrilled the mother to death. Then she, sure, be happy if you do that. So this young girl then went out the next day in her pickup, and instead of taking a camera with her, she took a pistol with her. She killed the mother. She set fire. She took the baby, put it in her pickup. She set fire to the house, burned the house, burning another child who was alive, and burning the mother. And then we tried the case, and there were outstanding lawyers both ways. Gary Isbell prosecuted the case. Gary later became a circuit judge. Roy Danhuser, a longtime trial lawyer from that area, was one of the defense attorneys. Let's see, Ken Smith from Yellville was trying the case. He was the defense attorney. The other defense attorney later became a federal judge in Fort Smith. They never once ever admitted that this girl was guilty, but they never tried to tell that jury she was innocent. They played it as an insanity case, and they had 3 doctors that came in and testified that she was. They couldn't fit her in exactly in Arkansas law for insanity, but they've testified. One of them said, she had these various personalities. Another then testified to one thing, and another did that. And it was one of the most interesting cases I ever heard. The jury wound up, hung up. I mean, the crime itself, sure indicated somebody was crazy to do something that terrible, that horrible. But yet, as I say, they couldn't fit her exactly into Arkansas law, so they hung up. Well, later on, she pled guilty. We didn't try her again. She pled guilty and served a long time in prison. Might still be there at the time. But that may have been one of the wildest cases I heard.
What about civil cases in Washington County? Any of them that stand out?
Well, I had a number. Offhand, I don't know of one, that really stands out that much overall. Unless it was something really, really outstanding, I tried to put the case I heard yesterday behind me. I learned early on when I was trying cases involving child custody, involving domestic problems, that if you carried that home with you and you're really worried about, did I make the right decision now? And to start with, I did. I'd come in and I'd really worry, did I do the right thing? Did I place that child at the right place? And if you let that stay with you, you're not going to be a judge very long. And so I sort of started putting it behind me. I put behind me the names of the people, and unless there's something really, really unusual, I just didn't, they were gone. I went to the next case and decided it.
You were judge for many years in Washington County. Who are some of the lawyers that stuck out in your mind that were maybe some of the top lawyers in those days?
Well, Bill Putnam's name, of course, comes to bat then, right off the bat. Jim Blair were 2 that I thought were really outstanding. John Everett was outstanding. I need to be thinking closer now because I don't want to leave out names and so forth. Your dad was an outstanding lawyer, I thought, in the county. He was very competent, very capable, knew how to try cases. And a few people would try to come into the courtroom that really need to be working in the office instead of trying cases. You know, doing things, working up cases, getting things to be ready. Because I think it takes a little knack for a person to come in there and then and match their wits in cases. Jack Butt was really good. Sid Davis was outstanding. Walter Cox was outstanding. I could give you a list of really good lawyers, and I'll tell you this: we were blessed in Washington and Benton counties, Madison County to have, I think, some of the best lawyers in the state, because I tried cases. In the long run, I tried cases in 69 of the 75 counties, and man, I'll tell you what, they were good lawyers in some of those other places, but I mean, our lawyers could put some to shame in what they were doing. But they kept up. They'd go to seminars. They'd go to schools and you know, to improve themselves and watch others. They'd watch some good lawyers in the courtroom and see how they handle cases, and so that made a difference.
A lot of the people we've talked to have mentioned John Everett. What was he like in court?
Well, I'll tell you. Let me go into what he would do. Let's suppose he was defending a case, criminal or civil, however it came about, and the attorney then for the plaintiff would get through with their witness, and he'd come up and cross-examine. John knew what the elements of that case was. If they had to prove three things, he had those three things in mind. He knew exactly what it was. And instead of just nibbling around the edges, John would come out and he'd pick out some of the stuff then that may have hurt him, some of the things that the witness had bear down on. And John would say, "Now you said so-and-so and so-and-so. Yes, you said so-and-so and so-and-so. You said," and all of a sudden John would drop the hatchet. He would lead that witness right into a trap someplace where the witness would, that couldn't have happened. I mean, George could see where that didn't happen. And then once he set the trap and he had it, he'd hush up and sit down. He didn't keep on, give him a chance to come back and clean up or get it right. And I thought that's what set him different for the rest. He didn't ask, questions that were going to hurt him. And he was good at picking a jury too. He did his homework. He'd study their backgrounds and see where they're at, and that's what made him good.
You mentioned some about your other judges, but tell me a little bit more about the judges that were on the bench while you were in Washington County.
Moppin Cummins was on the bench, I guess, maybe for 30 years. He was on there when I started out in 1968 as a lawyer, and I thought he was a great judge. I thought he was really good, and I'll have to tell you something comical that happened then. We had a professor at law school that had given some money to somebody who had bought a big spring in Eureka Springs. I think it may have been the Blue Springs. He'd given this guy some money then to buy into that, and then the guy went broke. And this professor hired Jim Gallman to represent him. And Gallman, of course, did work professors free of charge. They didn't charge people time for doing it. And besides that, Gallman knew that he could get a judgment, but the guy didn't have any money, so it was going to be one of those that you couldn't collect. So I was working as a clerk for them at the time. And Jim asked me then if I'd go over to Eureka Springs the next day with the professor at law school and take a summary judgment motion, and I had an order then for the judge to sign then if he'd grant that summary judgment motion, and just present it to Judge Cummins and let him sign it then and come on back home. Well, when I got over there, this day happened to be a new term of court in Eureka Springs, and Judge Cummins qualified a new jury then ahead of everybody else. Then he started in with the lawyers who were waiting then they were pretty much going to present orders to them then to be signed. And finally it came my turn. We had a list that was down there which order we were in. And I went up and Judge Cummins looked at me and he says, "Lineberger, you're not licensed to practice law yet?" I said, "No, sir. I didn't know I had to be doing it." "Yeah, you got to be licensed to practice. You can't do this." And so one of the older lawyers who was around there was named Hubert Birch. And Hubert came over to me and he said, "John, you have your client here?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." And he said, "What's this about?" And I told him. And he said, "You got your orders there?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Bring the client on around." And so he did. And Hubert then presented the affidavit to Judge Cummins. Judge Cummins signed the order, handed it back to Hubert. Hubert signed it, handed it to me, and I went home then with the signed order. And that was wonderful. Hubert stepped in and did that. But anyway, the judge was a good judge. I think he went for a period of, I don't know, 2 or 3 years at one time without a reversal. That is, the Supreme Court didn't reverse a single case that was appealed up there to him, and which was unusual at the time. And then Judge Tom Butt was the chancellor, and he served 50 years. Unfortunately, as you probably remember, then he died. Then he resigned during the last year and died without an opportunity then to enjoy retirement. He was one of the smartest judges I ever knew in my life. He could hear a case, he could give an opinion from the bench, and if you didn't know it, you'd think that he'd spent hours drafting that opinion and going back and rewriting because the words just came to him. I remember one of the lawyers telling me one time that after trying a case in front of Judge Butt, sometimes he'd get almost back to his office before he realized that we lost. Because he could put it in words that sounded like it was just perfect then. And so I got a lot of good training from those two judges, just from watching them and working with them. But Judge Bill Enfield in Benton County was good then. We had a lot of folks that I thought that were very competent and capable. I just felt so honored to have the opportunity to work alongside them because, I mean, they were giants in my estimation.
Judge Butt, one of the things that we've heard in some of the interviews is that he was kind of a stickler on proving, on divorce cases, on
Yes.
proving cause, I guess.
Yes, yes, he was.
So explain what that is and how he did that.
Well, you have to show cause on divorces unless, at that time at least, unless the parties were separated, I think for 3 years, I believe. And most of the time they had been separated that long. So you had to go in and you had to prove that your grounds, and whatever you alleged in your complaint, you had to prove it, and which would take a little time to do it. And if you didn't prove it, he didn't grant the divorce. So Judge Cummins, sometimes Judge Butt would be out of town, and Judge Cummins would hear some of his uncontested cases. And a lot of lawyers like to get around Judge Cummins because he used to lay the order in front of him and he'd sign it. The only thing that if you started in on grounds and had some sort of an interesting thing that had been going on with that family, Judge Cummins sometimes would take over the questioning. He wanted to hear the whole story, what it was. But Judge Butt made you prove your ground. So, but that was the law at the time. I wasn't a stickler for doing that because I thought, if it was uncontested, that is, both parties had signed papers that they were through, and I thought that was time then to grant them a divorce. Then, not because I tried a lot of cases where people stayed married too long, and I'm not one, that thinks that you need to jump up and divorce in a hurry. I've been married 65 years to the same woman. Fortunately, I've been able to do that. And oh man, I heard some horrible things after a lengthy marriage where people should have been divorced 20 or 30 years earlier and found some happiness in life.
Who were the clerks that you remember working with or that were in charge during those times in Washington County?
Al McComber was the circuit clerk, a long-time circuit clerk in Washington County, and Marilyn Edwards was the county clerk. And they were great to work with at the time. Once they kept good records, kept good books, they were up to date, and I never worried, about papers. On rare occasions, you might have somebody might put one file in another place, but boy, they'd find it, they'd catch it in a hurry. So when files came through, they were complete.
What about other people in the courthouse? You probably knew everyone. Did you talk about who were some of the personalities or
Bob Lester, Charlie Johnson were county judges back at that time. The interesting thing is that people ran on a party label, I guess, for office back then. But you never knew then that they were members of the party. I mean, they worked together. Nobody ever said, this is a Republican thing or this is a Democratic thing. They got along and they worked together, and I thought that was good. I've just got a lot of good memories. We had, as I said, we had a good bar to work with, and some people get the notion that lawyers try to get errors in cases, and occasionally that happens. They do. They'll try to lead a judge into error someplace and get it reversed on appeal. But I found that the good lawyers wanted to try that case one time, and they wanted the judge to get it right. They wouldn't try to create error in the record, because after a jury heard it, or after a judge had heard a case that's pretty complicated, they wanted finality, and that helped. And that helped the judges then, because as I say, I got a lot of help then from the lawyers as such.
What about some of the other judges that came on later? Judge Story, Judge Zimmerman. Did you work with any of them?
I did.
Tell me about it.
I worked with Judge Story. I worked with Judge Lindsey. Judge Lindsey took my place at the time. He was elected after I retired. And Judge Mashburn came along. Judge Best Story then, Bryant, is there now. Judge Zimmerman, who am I missing? And Judge Martin, Judge Treat, all of those. Now, Judge Treat and Judge Martin came along after I retired, but I had a chance to go back then and sit then by assignment down there, and one of those judges had to recuse at times, so I got to be around them at times, see them operate, see how they worked, and Washington County is fortunate.
Talk to me about the mediation. I think isn't that kind of become a bigger thing?
I'm a big fan of mediation. I think if people can settle a case themselves, it means so much more than going through an extensive trial, maybe an appeal, whatever. And I tell people, in mediation, nobody's going to be thrilled to death at the end of the mediation if they settle, because you're not going to get everything you want. Neither side's going to get everything they expect whenever they come in there. There's got to be some give and take. There's got to be some bargaining. But if a person can settle it themselves, go home and get a good night's sleep, and not have to worry about what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to worry about what happens in trial, they're so much better off. And I'll tell you, I tell folks, it's kind of like you remember Coach Lou Holtz that was here a long time. I remember Lou talking about times, he says, the best team don't always win, and he proved it, at times. He said if the best team won in football all the time, we wouldn't need to play the game. All you need to do is just mail in then the weights of your players, their speed, their intelligence, a host of things that go into making up a good football player. Just mail it in and let the computer or let somebody look at all of the stuff on both sides and decide who wins. And that's kind of like a trial. And if a lawyer knows exactly what's going on in a trial and what's going to take place in a trial, they could be a better guide then as to about settling the case. But you'll never hear a good lawyer ever tell the client, you've got a lead pipe central. We're going to win this case, because things happen that's unexpected all the time. And I can see it as a judge, and I can see the kind of a drooped face on a lawyer then because of what one witness said or didn't say, and which might make a difference in the course of that trial. And I'll give you an experience about what happened one time. When I was practicing law at the time, Jim Gallman represented, and I was just carrying water for him then. I was fresh out of law school, and we represented a client who went swimming over in Siloam Springs, at the lake outside of Siloam Springs, and he had jumped off the bank and impaled himself on a stop sticking under the water. And you can imagine what that did. I mean, he had a lot of medical bills and a lot of things that went on, and we couldn't sue the city of Siloam Springs, which owns the lake, but Siloam Springs had insurance. We sued the insurance company directly, and we thought we had a much better chance of getting a judgment than I guess the insurance company would have if Siloam Springs had been named a defendant. And we had interviewed people, so the defense, the sole defense really of the other sides I recall now was that there was a no swimming sign up out there, and these people were in swimming when they shouldn't have been. And we talked to a lot of folks around to try to find somebody that might say there was, And we couldn't find anybody. I said, no, there wasn't any no swimming sign up. And our clients, were certain that there was no swimming sign up. And we went to trial. And our client's wife was on the stand. And Mr. Goldman couldn't wait to ask her about this swimming sign, because that was the only defense that the insurance company had. She saw no swimming sign, and she says, yeah, I did. well, Mr. Goldman was accustomed to that. He'd been a prosecutor for many years before, and so he was used to witnesses coming like that. So he worked around a little bit and came back and tried to come in another door. Well, she stayed with that she saw that sign. And of course the defense did not bother to cross-examine her, and then the defense got up, and the only thing they did at the time, you heard that little lady tell you there's no swimming out there, and the case was gone. And so that's where I learned that you can look for the unexpected. I remember those after we lost, our client looked at Mr. Goldman and says, what do we do now? He said, go home, we lost. That happened.
Are you still doing some mediation cases? And if so, tell me how you got involved in that.
I still do a few. I'm just about to get out of the game of all of it. I'm getting to the point in time, where I really, I guess, need to shut her down then and quit completely. But I got involved in it after I quit, retired from the bench. I was hearing assignments. I started hearing some assignments. And then I got kind of interested in mediation. I'd heard about some people that were working in mediation and what a good job they were doing and how they liked it. So I went to school and took a course then to qualify me then to be a certified mediator, which you don't have to do, but as long as the judge would accept you. But I thought maybe I better do that, and I'm glad I did. And I realized then on it, if you can settle those cases, if you get them to just get parties to talking, if you can get them to talking, and bring them on around then, and get rid of the nasty things they want to say then about the other side, that they can reach some deals that in the long run is best for everybody.
One of the interviews we did, someone talked about in the old days they used to do something similar to that before it ever came to trial, and I forget exactly the context. Maybe you know what I'm talking about.
Well, some judges would have a settlement day, they'd call it, and they'd get parties in and try to get the case settled. Now the problem is, if a judge started taking part in that settlement, he or she had to recuse. I mean, you couldn't sit there, and listen to the facts of the case and listen to what people were saying in mediation and then go in and try the case. So there's kind of a danger then if a judge did that. If the case didn't settle, you had to pick cases that you just, were pretty certain it's going to settle. Or the lawyers on both sides would tell you, yeah, we can settle it, Judge, if you'll get them together in order to prevent then a recusal.
What are some other things that stand out, maybe some of your best memories or some of the things memories that stick out over the years?
Well, one of the things when I first was appointed to go on the bench, I really didn't expect to run the next year for another position. I thought I'll serve out this little time, and then I can use that. I can put it on my resume that I've sat in the judge's chair before, and maybe to help get clients to come in and do a little better. But after I got on the bench, I realized then I wasn't having to work at nights. I wasn't having to work weekends, holidays, and all that like I had been when I was in law practice. So I sort of enjoyed then that, although on those cases I was assigned to, we worked late at the time, but I was used to that. And but I guess the camaraderie then of the bar overall was good. I enjoyed that. We used to have fish fries. I'd have that every summer. Whenever we built this place, we'd have them up here. Barbara and I were houseboaters, and we used to have our houseboat at Rocky Branch, and we'd catch a lot of catfish over there, and we'd fry them up for the bar then, and have the bar to come up and do it. Well, it got to where the bar was so big then, and Benton County was coming, Madison County lawyers we were inviting all come in, and we started having to buy those catfish into it. And then we finally had to give that up, and it was just more than we could handle, we could take care of. But we got to have camaraderie then with the bar, and enjoy being with them. Enjoy being with them then whenever we had the bar meetings and so forth. And so I had some excellent people I worked with during the time that, well, you know, we had disappointments along the way. I don't mean to say it's all easy. Some of those cases, and you'd scratch your head and really have to work and study and study and study to do it. But overall, it was a good run.
How were juvenile cases handled back in the day, and then how has that changed over time?
Well, it's changed remarkably. It's turned around completely. When I first started out, the county judge had jurisdiction to hear juvenile cases, and county judges, of course, were not lawyer trained, and everybody handled it differently. I remember one county I went to whenever I was in law school. We did a project that I was in a seminar, and we did a paper. And one of the things we had to do was go around and interview some of these county judges and see how they conducted and handled juvenile court. And I remember in one county, the judge didn't have to make a record of anything. If they brought a juvenile in, he'd call the judge's parents down there, and he'd tell the dad, "You take that belt off and go back here in my office, and you know, you straighten him out, or if you don't do it, I'll do it." And so that was his method of handling juveniles at the time. Of course, there weren't many coming in then. I mean, the police, they didn't want to see a kid whipped like that, so they wouldn't pick up a juvenile unless it was a pretty bad case that was going on. And then some counties, like Washington County, I think Judge Charles Johnson was county judge at the time. He didn't try to handle them. He appointed what he called a master, who was a lawyer, to handle those cases. And that lawyer did a good job, I think, because he applied the law and overall. But then the county or the legislature, with a lot of help from Hillary Clinton, she had worked on committees with the bench and the bar to get juvenile justice on par with where it should be. And so I think the Supreme Court declared our juvenile system unconstitutional as it was set up then. And as a result, the chancellors and the circuit judge had to handle those juvenile cases. And we'd go over, and back at the end of it, they weren't near as many as they are today. And Judge Butt and I handled some, and then Judge Cummins handled some at the time. But finally, after the legislature enacted that law, then to elect a full-time juvenile judge to do it, well, that brought our juvenile system way up in the world then. Judge Story, I believe, was the first juvenile judge in Washington County. And then he was appointed then by Governor Clinton to serve as the juvenile judge, and then he ran for circuit judge. And after Judge Gibson retired, and Judge Story was elected then to be the circuit judge.
What about the current judge? How does she do?
Well, I'll tell you, she's the hardest working judge I've ever known in my life. She's going to get some help now. The legislature, just as you know, just passed an act then creating a new judgeship in Washington County, and I understand the new judge then will take a good part of Judge Zimmerman's cases. She works sometimes from 7 in the morning till late at night. She's on that bench every day. I've sat at times for her whenever she's been able to get out of there and attend a seminar, or she's been ill, or for other reasons, and I know what that workload is. I know how many cases come through there every day. And when I was sitting as either circuit judge or chancellor, a lot of days we'd set 2 or 3 cases, but they'd all settle. And some judges didn't like the settlement on the day of trial, and particularly if you had a jury coming in, they'd complain about that. But I used to say, you know, if the cases didn't settle, I never would get a haircut then. I couldn't get to the barbershop. But anyway, we wouldn't sit like her every day then. You could cases settle, and you can go back then, you could write opinions, or if there's some other work to be done, review cases coming up. You weren't sitting there under the gun every day. She's under the gun every single day for long hours. So my hats are off to her then. I have the highest admiration for her and the job she's doing there. She knows juvenile law well, applies it well, and she's really has those parents and kids in her best interest.
One of the things that's interesting is back in the day, all the judges were men.
That's true.
And that's not the case anymore. Women have a majority of the seats. Can you talk about how that shift?
Well, I'm not sure what brought it on. I guess just because more women started running for judgeship then, and fortunately the bar is not somebody to discriminate, and they're proving they can do a job equally to men, and that's been the case overall. And the judges we've had here have done the job good. Nobody's been thrown off the bench, and nobody's been. I haven't heard any complaints, speak of. Oh, you hear a complaint here and there about some disgruntled person that lost the case, but nothing from a lot of folks complaining. I'll say this: when I was on the bench, I used to tell my bailiffs, whoever was bailiff on, after I make a decision, I try a case, I announce my decision for the bench, and I'd go back to chambers. I'd tell my bailiff, "Don't you ever come back and tell me what you heard in the hall, after the trial, because I don't care how you try to dress up things. Somebody lost that didn't expect to lose. They were in there trying a case they expected to win, and most people were nice enough. They wouldn't complain in the hall after the case was over with. They'd go out to the parking lot and they may complain a little out there, but most people did their complaints after they got home. But there'd be a few though that wanted to complain then in the hall or complain then around where somebody could hear it, and I never wanted to hear that because I didn't want to have anybody coming back there and want to argue the case all over again.
You mentioned before the interview about Judge Wapner, a TV judge. Talk about who he was and how you ended up meeting him.
Well, Judge Wapner was the first, I think, TV judge. In the nature of Judge Judy, but there's a bunch of them that come on there now. Judge Wapner was judge of the People's Court, is what it was called then. And what happened, they would take misdemeanor cases usually from some court, and get the parties to agree to that be heard. This was kind of mediation, is what it amounted to. They would agree that his decision would be binding on whatever they wanted to do. And so he sat in the People's Court 10, 12 years. Well, I had the good fortune during the time I was sitting on a bench to teach in seminars at the National Judicial College in Nevada, and did that for 21 years. And so one year, and I guess it was the late 80s, I was out there teaching in one, and that invited Judge Wapner to come in, and he also taught in that seminar. So I got to meet him, got to know him fine. Wonderful person. He'd been a real live judge in California for 10 years or so before he got this job. And I asked him one day how he got it and why he took it on. He said, well, he wasn't quite sure how he got picked then to do it. But anyway, he said they put an insane amount of money on the table and I took it. So he knew the law well then. I sat in his class and myself in because I wanted to see what he had to say then to the judges then he was speaking to. His wife was from a little town called Mercedes, Texas. And as a result of her being from Texas, my wife, was there from Arkansas, and some of the other southern judges' wives, she was really interested in being around them, and they enjoyed her company during the time. In fact, Judge Wapner had at the time I was president of Arkansas Judicial Council, and the president got to invite somebody to speak at our annual meetings. And I invited him to be our speaker, and he agreed to come, but unfortunately his wife got pretty ill just ahead of time, and he called me and told me he just was not going to be able to make it then. She couldn't come, and he didn't want to leave her time, and so we missed that good fortune of having him come down and speak to the Arkansas judges.
What's something maybe that a lot of people don't know about judges, or maybe a misconception about judges?
Well, some people have a notion a judge can just decide a case however he or she wants to, whatever outcome they have, and that's not the case at all. You've got to listen to every word of everybody, because if you're sitting there napping along the way, some lawyer's going to object to something that's said, and if you missed what it was, you can wind up in an error whenever you're doing it. But I found you need to listen to the entire case, and oftentimes I've finished a case and I don't know how I'm going to rule until I get the briefs of the lawyers, and I'll read those briefs and I'll start writing my opinion, and sometimes I don't even know how I'm going to rule in until I put down what I find to be the facts. And after I make a finding of facts like that, then I'll make a decision about it. That's not often the case. Many times cases just fall out, are pretty simple, one way or the other. But you have to be careful about what you're doing all the way through. Do the best you can, and then go to the next case.
Before we get to our final couple of questions, did you have anything else you wanted to add or any other comments you wanted to make? Reflections, thoughts?
Well, I probably ramble too much already. I, I just am grateful. I'm very, very grateful to the people of Washington and Madison County for electing me as a judge. From my first race, it was really close. Was running against an outstanding lawyer who had been in the legislature for a good while. He was one of the ones that helped create that judgeship, and he had hoped to be the judge over that at the time. And he ran a good, clean race, but it was close. I was fortunate enough to win. And then after that, I was able. Then I didn't have another opponent after that. I was grateful for that opportunity. But the opportunity to serve as a judge has been a real rewarding experience for me, and I feel humbled by it. I don't know how somebody that came, as poor as I did from a dirt farm, and came up like I did. All I can say is I had a good wife. Led me along and helped me along the way then, and I'm thankful for that.
If you were talking to somebody, maybe at one of your meetings out of state, or just somebody who'd never been to Washington County, and they said, "Judge, tell me about Washington County. What's it like?" What would you tell them?
Well, of course, the first thought, it's a growing county, and you've got a diverse group of people there, new people coming in all the time, and they work for Walmart or one of their vendors or the university or other places. So we have a real mixture of people. There's not any one group or one outfit then that stands out in your mind. And so I like that. I like, the diverse group. I like to have that for juries that were coming in. And I guess that's the first thing. We have caring people here, very caring, as you can notice by the donors to help the poor, to help out in all kind of things. I mean, look at these donations. Look at Children's Hospital when they agreed to come up here. My gosh, they had a ton of money then. It was donated to start with by people who could afford to donate, and so it was easy for them to come in here. So we've got that outstanding hospital. We've well, I just can't. I really can't say enough about. There's just all kind of good things going on in this area that we need to be thankful for every day we're here.
How would you finish this sentence, Judge? My favorite thing about Washington County is.
Oh man, my favorite thing about Washington County is there are so many things that I'm grateful for. I'm grateful, we have a university here where people can have an opportunity to get an education and to go into things like I was able to do. And I say come from a poor background, but be able to get training from people that knew how to train to have the opportunities I've had in life. I'm thankful to have known people that were very wealthy, and to know how humble they were and how respectful they were to other people who helped them get wealthy. And Sam Walton, for example, we've got a lot of Walmart millionaires in this area, people that didn't have a high school education and went to work for him. And he didn't pay them a lot of money, but he paid for insurance, and he also divided stocks with them. And that's how they made their money then. Those stocks were, they were splitting. They were worth a ton of money every day. The lawyer that incorporated Walmart said Mr. Sam would come in his office and he'd want to pay him with stocks. And he took those stocks, for a long time, and he had a bunch of them. And he told Mr. Sam one day, he said, "Sam, I can't eat these stocks you're giving me. I need some money." So he paid him some money, and he said, "I regret the day I said that," because those stocks became very, very valuable, and they're worth a lot more than the money he paid at the time. But those people, look how they've helped our community then with the donations they've done, with things they've done to better the community. And we need to recognize the Tysons, the Hunts, on and on and on. I could go with the names of great people that have shared their wealth with others that are less fortunate.